Hello! Hello out there in the internet, and welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. I am your host, Sarumann, aka Josh, and I'm looking at the chat and I see that we've got some regulars in here. Eravandi and I Stole the One Ring, and I Stole the One Ring is feeling a little sick today. I'm sorry to hear that. Hope you feel better. And I Stole the One Ring is also saying, I'm sick, but I won't miss the book club. That's very sweet of you to say, but we do have archives of this. You don't need to be here live if you don't feel up to it. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad everybody's here, and I know we've had a bit of a rough patch with the show for the last few weeks, mostly due to technical issues, but they should all be resolved now. So that's good. The big thing, of course, that means is that we've gone behind a little bit in where I was hoping we would be in our coverage of the Silmarillion. There it is. So that means today we're going to be doing an extra long episode to try to catch up, which means we're going to be covering 3 chapters rather than our typical 1 or 2. And these are 3 rather big chapters too. They are of the return of the Noldor, of Beleriand and its realms, and of the Noldor in Beleriand. So this is a very info heavy episode. So brace yourselves. I put together a big slideshow, which was part of what was causing us technical issues before, was all these slideshows and all these slideshows and images that I put together. But I found ways around that, and now we can do it without crashing everything. So that's good. And I see Dwina is here in the chat. Good to see you, Dwina. It's been a while. Before we get into the Silmarillion, of course, just a quick reminder that our book of the month for June is The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the movie from the 80s that it was based on. That movie only covers probably about the first third of this book. Which begs the question, how could they get 2 sequels so completely wrong when there was material right there for them to use? But regardless, we'll be discussing that at the end of June or maybe the beginning of July. I have to double check. Oh yeah, July 5th is when we'll be discussing that. So brace yourselves. That's going to be a fun discussion. I'm looking forward to that. So, without further ado, let's get into the Silmarillion. I put together a lot of I Stole the One Ring saying I'm still looking for the book. Yeah. When I went to my local Barnes & Noble to get a copy of it, she's talking about The Never-Ending Story. They had 1 copy, and I bought it. And it didn't even have a cover that I really liked, but it was the only copy they had. So be it. But yeah, bookstores may not carry it that much anymore, but you could probably find it at your local library, more than likely. So yeah, let's change tracks now and get into the Silmarillion with our presentation. And we start with previously on the Silmarillion, because it's been a while since we've discussed it, so I wanted to do a quick recap of what's happened so far. So let us begin with this. We have wrong one. There we go. We have Fëanor, who is hot-headed, hot-tempered, the spirit of fire, and he creates the Silmarils, 3 jewels that contain the light of Aman, the light of the trees of Valinor. And the trees of Valinor are destroyed by Morgoth, also known as Melkor, but now more as Morgoth. And he not only destroys the trees, he he kills Fëanor's father, Finwë, and steals the Silmarils and heads to Middle-earth to reestablish his dark kingdom of Angband. And Fëanor gathers all of his kin together, the Noldor, and they swear an oath to hunt down Morgoth to the ends of the earth and to take back the Silmarils. And he's so dogged in this that he ends up killing a bunch of people a bunch of elves in the harbor city of Alqualande to get from Valinor back to Middle-earth. And at that point, the Valar curse him and tell him that he will be forever bound to... he and his kin will be forever bound to hardship and strife as they search for the Silmarils. So, there we go. Next up. And so Fëanor steals the ships from Alqualande and sails across to Middle-earth, abandoning his half-brother Fingolfin and his people. And Fingolfin and everybody are forced to march across the icy wastes of the Hel Caraxa, which is the only land bridge between Valinor and Middle-earth, to get over there and join Fëanor in the fight. But Fëanor is not satisfied with just sailing across. He then burns the ships as soon as he gets over to the Middle-earth side of the sea. And from there we pick up where we left off. And so, where are we? So with the burning of the ships at an area called Losgar, Fëanor and all of his kin, the Noldor, raise up a mighty cry, and everybody in Middle-earth hears it. And many of the Sindar elves who have stayed behind in Middle-earth hear this and think that the Noldor have come as emissaries of the Valar to destroy Morgoth. They're kind of right, but it's the details they're not aware of. So, as soon as they get to Middle-earth... it's time to bring up the map. I have a nice little map here of Middle-earth to help us sort of follow where everybody is. Right now, where we left off, Fëanor and everybody have landed in this... nope, wrong. They've landed in this area here called Drengist, and they burned the ships in a harbor called Losgar. And Fëanor and everybody, they set up camp in this area here, this area surrounded by mountains called Hithlum, and they set up camp on the shores of this lake here called Mithrim. And before they can even get very far in setting up their camp, come on, you. They've set up a mighty cry so everybody knows, and Morgoth sends orcs to get them. And the orcs go from Angband, and they charge right over to Hithlum and begin the attack. And the Noldor and Fëanor and everybody, since they are just full of fire and energy, they've just crossed the sea. They just utterly destroy these orcs. And yeah, here we go. And Fëanor is just pleased as punch that they're taking that they're taking out the orcs in such a humongous way. And so they pretty much wipe out all of the orcs up in this area, but there are still orcs down here, and they start charging up when they see the battle, and that's when we enter Fëanor's brother, Celegorm, and he takes up a battle on a second front and wipes out the orcs there. So that takes care of that. They've pretty much just wiped out a whole bunch of orcs very quickly. But Fëanor is not really satisfied with taking out the orcs here. He believes that he's got them on the run, and he is ready to just charge ahead. And so basically charges ahead of everybody he charges ahead of everyone in his company and makes a straight shot for Angband. He basically is just he's just a Leroy Jenkins at this point. He's just charging ahead by himself. He doesn't care. Marfels is asking, was Morgoth the one who created the orcs? Yes, he was. Back when he was Melkor, the Ainur, he kidnapped a bunch of the first elves when they had just awoken and began torturing them and twisting them, and eventually orcs were made from that, and that's where the orcs come from. So we got Leroy Jenkins, Fëanor charging ahead of everybody into Angband, and he is of course surrounded on all sides. But he doesn't care. He's still fighting. He's still killing everything in sight. The fury and the fire is in his heart. And that's when he encounters the Lord of the Balrogs, Gothmog. And they have a big knockdown, drag-out fight, and Fëanor is just wounded, and basically he becomes mortally wounded from this by the time everybody finally catches up to him. And yes, exactly, Temple Leroy Jenkins. And Marfels is saying, kind of remember that from Aragorn's explanation, thought that was for the ring race. What Aragorn described in Lord of the Rings was the origin of the Nazgul and the ring wraiths, yes. It's actually Sarumann who explains it a little bit in Fellowship of the Ring when he's talking with Lurtz when he's first born. He says something, do you know how the orcs came to being? They were elves once, taken by the dark powers, a twisted and ruined and terrible form of life, and now perfected with my fighting Uruk-hai. And so that's the little insight into it, and we get more details about it in the Silmarillion, but that was covered a few chapters ago, so I don't want to focus too much time on that. So at this point, Fëanor is taken from battle. He's mortally wounded, and he's taken back to Hithlum. He's taken back to this area, and it's around here on the mountains that he finally sees just what he's up against. He sees the full might of Morgoth and Angband and Thangorodrim. This is a good approximation of what he probably saw. Thangorodrim are 3 huge mountains that Morgoth has erected as part of his fortress. Now, the fortress of Angband is mostly underground, but you can see the mountains of Thangorodrim, the Iron Mountains behind it that spread west, east, and north and are completely impassable, and the fortress of Angband exists primarily underneath that. But this is what he sees and realizes he can't go up against this, but he still is Fëanor, so he curses the name of Morgoth thrice and puts it on his sons to keep the search for the Silmarils going and to keep the fight against Morgoth going, and then he dies. So that's the end of Fëanor. But he doesn't just die. He doesn't just die and become a corpse. He actually dissolves into dust and gets taken off in the wind. And Tolkien describes it as, or he explains it as, the fire of his spirit was burned so hot that when it passed from his body just dissolved from it. So that is the end of Fëanor. So what's up next? Okay, so up next, we have the kingship of the Noldor then falls to Fëanor's oldest son, Maedhros. And before they even really have time to settle down and regroup, the orcs come again, but this time as an emissary of peace. They're here to treat with them. Tolkien just says it's an emissary from Morgoth. Part of me likes to think, and this is entirely speculation on my part, this is not part of the text. I like to believe that the emissary was Eravandi says, Fëanor's end reminds me of Bofur saying, poof, you're nothing but a pile of ash. Actually, the way I kind of pictured it was more like the dagger, the Morgul blade in Fellowship of the Ring just sort of dissolving. Like, that's kind of how I pictured that. So anyway, Maedhros is visited by an emissary from Morgoth with orcs, and like I said, this is just speculation on my part, but I like to believe that the emissary who came to him was none other than Morgoth's second in command, Sauron. And again, that's totally speculation on my part. That's not part of the text. He just says an emissary. So Maedhros decides, okay, I will meet you at the place appointed. That's about as much detail as we get. And neither one of them really trust each other. So Maedhros brings some soldiers with him, and of course, Morgoth's emissary likes to he brings some soldiers with him, and he also brings some Balrogs, and they overpower him. And he kidnaps Maedhros. He kills everybody and then takes Maedhros as a hostage. And Maedhros is taken back to Angband, and here's the awful thing. He is then chained to a mountain. Morgoth chains him to one of the peaks of Thangorodrim by one hand, and basically leaves him there and holds him as a hostage, and says to all the remaining elves, either go back to Valinor or go down south and leave me alone, and I'll return Maedhros to you. But they don't believe him, nor should they. And plus, they also have the Oath of Fëanor that they've sworn, which basically has them obligated to keep going, to keep fighting Morgoth, and so there's nothing they can do. They're stuck, and Maedhros is stuck. They can't get to him, and so he's stuck hanging off of a mountain by one arm, and that is a terrible, terrible fate. Marfels is asking, how long was he hung like that? It's kind of hard. Tolkien doesn't give a good time frame for that, or he doesn't give an actual time frame for how long it's I should get rid of that thing. He doesn't really give a time frame for how long Maedhros was chained up, but certainly a good long while. So So as this happens, Fingolfin and his people, who have been crossing the icy wastes of the Helcaraxa, finally arrive in Middle-earth. Let's bring up that map again. So they finally arrive in Middle-earth, and they come down this way. And where'd it go? There it is. And it also happens that at this point, the Valar finally launch the sun. The sun has finally risen in Middle-earth, and for the first time in eons, Middle-earth is finally cast in daylight, and this freaks out the orcs. This freaks out Morgoth, it freaks out everybody in Angband, and they immediately retreat into the mountains. And so, this whole area here, that up to this point, this is the plain called Argolin, which is the main battle plane for most of this. All this area, and then this area up here, Morgoth's land in front of Angband, which is called Dor Daedaloth. All this area that had been full of orcs basically empties out, and Fingolfin and his people, and he also has the sons of his brother Finarfin with him. So it's a very large company that comes across, and they begin an assault on Angband with Tolkien says by blowing trumpets primarily, so it's very like Joshua and the Walls of Jericho, only in this they don't tear anything down. At this point, Fingolfin kind of realizes that it's going to take more than trumpets to take down the walls of Angband, and so there's Angband. And yeah, so they eventually decide, okay, we're gonna regroup and try to have a better strategy for taking out Morgoth. So they head into Hithlum, because that's where they've heard the sons of Fëanor are, and at this point there is a lot of bad blood between Fingolfin and the sons of Fëanor, because Fëanor basically abandoned them, and all the sons of Fëanor they're shocked that Fingolfin and everybody was able to make it across the Helcaraxa and were able to make it to Middle-earth, and they want to apologize and they want to make peace with them, but they're so ashamed of what has happened that basically there's just a very cold silence between them. And the sons of Fëanor are set up on one side of Lake Mithrim, and Fingolfin and the sons of Finarfin are set up on the other. And it should be noted also that Fingolfin and Finarfin's children make up a much larger company than the sons of Fëanor. So this is very tense right now between them, and not much is getting done. So, what's next? I had this whole thing broken down into sections to try to keep this all straight in my head, because there's a lot. Okay, just did that. Now. Okay, so we can get rid of the map for a second here. I've cleared the board. Okay, good. I'm running like 3 different programs to keep this going, so I have to click between a whole bunch of stuff, so I apologize for the stopping and staring. So now we have Fingolfin's oldest son, Fingon, who was a good friend of Maedhros back in Valinor. And he's heard the story about how Maedhros was kidnapped and is now being held as a hostage in Angband. And so Fingon decides, in order to sort of like heal the wounds between their houses, he is going to go to Angband on his own because the orcs are no longer patrolling outside, and he's going to try to rescue Maedhros on his own. And so he goes to Angband and he begins climbing the peaks of Thangorodrim. And he's basically looking for Maedhros, can't find him. I should mention also that when Fingolfin was attacking Angband, Maedhros could see them because he was high up in the peaks of Thangorodrim, and he's screaming and crying to them to find him, and nobody can hear him, so it's doubly tragic. But Fingon climbs Thangorodrim and starts looking around, hoping to find him, and he can't. And so he starts he basically at some point sits down and starts singing a song. Marfels is saying, I was wondering if Josh was reading this or everything by memory. Well, just to let you know, I have read these chapters probably about 7 or 8 times in preparation for this, so I've got it practically memorized, but this outline here helps keep me on track too, because there's a lot of stuff in here. Like, it's only 3 chapters, but there's a lot packed in here. And so Fingon starts playing a song of Valinor, starts singing a song of Valinor while up in the mountains, and it's there that he starts to hear the song sung back to him, and he realizes that it's Maedhros, and he goes and he finds Maedhros chained to the peak, and he can't get to him because it's a steep precipice. Eravandi says, the moral of the Silmarillion, when in doubt, sing. It's quite true. But Fingon can't get to Maedhros. He's too high up. The cliff is too sheer. He can't climb up. He can't cut him down. And so at this point, Maedhros basically begs him to just shoot an arrow into him and put him out of his misery. And Fingon does this. He knocks his bow, puts the arrow in, and then sends out a prayer to Manwë, the king of the Valar, basically saying, "You're the Lord of the winds and of the air. Please speed this arrow and let it find its mark." Now, of course, since the elves are the children of Ilúvatar, Manwë actually hears this. But instead of granting that wish, he instead sends to him the King of Eagles, Thorondor. So, another trope that I love of Tolkien's is what I call Deus Ex Eagles. The Eagles always seem to come in and save the day at the last minute. And so Thorondor, the King of Eagles, comes to Fingon and carries him up to Maedhros. Like that. But Maedhros is still held too tightly to the cliff. He can't cut the bonds, and so Maedhros is still saying, "Listen, just kill me. This is the only way out of this for me." And Fingon decides instead, "Nope. I'm going to instead just cut off your hand. And so that's what he does. He cuts off Maedhros' hand and is able to free him that way. And so from there we see, this is the expanded image of Maedhros. You see he now has one hand. But he returns to the elves, wounded but alive, and everybody is in awe of Fingon for what he's done. And since Maedhros is the son of Fëanor, who was the king of the Noldor, the kingship should pass to Maedhros. But Maedhros, instead, he abdicates and says the kingship really should go to Fingolfin. Marvels is asking, what was the name of the eagle again? Thorondor. And this is really his only appearance, I think. So Maedhros abdicates his rightful place as king of the Noldor to Fingolfin because he calls him. He says, "You should be the king because you are the eldest and not the least wise." Because Fingolfin was the one who decided, you know what? The forces of Angband are too huge for us to take on right now. We should regroup. Something that Fëanor, Maedhros' father, didn't do. He just charged on ahead, and look what happened. So Maedhros' brothers are not entirely happy with this decision, but because Maedhros is the eldest, they have to they have to listen to him. They have to abide by it, and so Fingolfin becomes king of the Noldor and begins his reign. And by reign, I mean mostly. I'm thinking mostly setting a watch on Angband, because that's pretty much what he's charged with doing, because he has the Oath of Fëanor to deal with, so he basically has to fight Morgoth to the bitter end or until the Silmarils are returned. Temple is making some weird filky lyrics to Let It Go regarding Maedhros' hand. That's really funny. So, at this point, the deeds of the Noldor are spreading across Middle-earth, and they finally reach King Thingol, who has been living in the underground kingdom of Menegroth. And he's pretty much been the king of Middle-earth this entire time. And he lives in a kingdom called Doriath. Menegroth is his palace, his underground palace. Doriath is the name of his kingdom, which is guarded by a special barrier set up by his wife, Melian. And the border is called the Girdle of Melian, and it's basically a magic border that keeps anybody from getting in. And so it's a very well-protected kingdom. And Thingol doesn't entirely trust the Noldor. Even though the rumors have been going around that the Noldor have come to deliver Middle-earth from Morgoth, Thingol doesn't totally buy it. And he also is not willing to leave his kingdom because he knows that Morgoth will come back. And so he doesn't let anybody into Doriath except for the sons of Finarfin, who was Fingolfin's brother who stayed behind in Valinor. And the reason he lets them in is because they actually do have a bit of a claim of kinship to Thingol, because Thingol's brother Olwe continued the journey into Valinor, and his daughter Eärwen married Finarfin and is the mother to all of the sons of Finarfin. So they're kind of like distant cousins. And so Thingol will allow the sons of Fingolfin into Doriath. And so they send in... So the first emissary to go into Doriath to talk to Thingol is Fingolfin's son, Angrod. And this is basically him... He wants to tell Thingol what's happened, but he's being very shady about certain details. He doesn't tell him about Morgoth destroying the trees and killing Finwë and stealing the Silmarils. He doesn't tell him anything about the Silmarils. He doesn't tell him anything about the kinslaying. At one point, I had to ask myself, what exactly did he tell Thingol? Because it seems like all that's left is we crossed an icy waste to get here, and Thingol pretty much accepts that and doesn't ask anything further. But he sets out a rule saying only the sons of Fingolfin, only the children of Fingolfin are allowed into Doriath. Everybody else... You are welcome to take lands that aren't already claimed by other elves. Because he doesn't want the other elves, the other Sindar elves who have been living here for a very long time, to be ousted because these princes of the West have suddenly arrived. And so Angrod takes this message back to everybody. And it's actually Maedhros' younger brother, Caranthir, who is another son of Fëanor, who he's one who really sort of has the fire of Fëanor in him, and he doesn't like this arrangement at all. And he speaks out about it. Let's see if I can find the quote here. Noldor and Beleriand, Beleriand in its realms, Okay. So yeah, Caranthir basically says, "Let not the sons of Fingolfin run hither and thither with their tails to this dark elf in his caves, who made them our spokesman to deal with him. And though they be come indeed to Beleriand, let them not so swiftly forget that their father is a lord of the Noldor, though their mother be of other kin." Basically, he's saying the sons of Fingolfin should not have authority over us as far as working with Thingol goes. But Maedhros, where is he? Maedhros. There's Maedhros. Maedhros decides, he basically says, this is okay. This is how Thingol should rule his lands. He's a king. He wants to maintain authority over the lands that are his, and we should respect that. Otherwise, we're no better than the orcs. And so, with that in mind, and with the orcs and Morgoth firmly now back in Angband and not coming out anytime soon because they have sunlight to deal with, and Morgoth has been spewing up ash and smoke over Angband to combat the sun. But that's only that one area, so really they're not worried too much about the orcs coming out and expanding again. And so at this point, it's time for the Noldor to go out and start establishing their realms. And this is, we're actually going to skip around and do a little bit of a geography lesson to describe where everybody is, or where everybody spreads to. And we're going to start with Maedhros. Seeing that everybody was going to be, all of his brothers were basically, they're very hot-headed, just like Fëanor. And Maedhros decides, I'm going to take my brothers as far away from this area as possible, because I don't trust that the spirit of fire that is in our hearts will not do something drastic and terrible to Fingolfin and everybody else. And so he takes them from Hithlum here all the way across over to this area here. And this area goes by a lot of names, but for right now it's called the March of Maedhros. And that's where the sons of Fëanor, or the sons of Fëanor, established their realms. And since we've been talking a little bit about the angry brother Caranthir, we'll talk a little bit about where he establishes himself. Caranthir actually goes all the way over into this area here, in a mountain called Mount Rerir, which is on the border with dwarf territory. And Caranthir doesn't really care for the dwarves too much, but he's willing to make deals with them, and he's willing to, since he's the closest to them, he's totally okay with having first crack at whatever the dwarves bring out of their mountains to sell to the elves. And so that's how he establishes his kingdom. But he always sort of looks down his nose at the dwarves, and the dwarves don't really like him because he's so haughty, but money is money and trade is trade. And so they learn to sort of have at least a working business relationship. What is Temple says, that sounds like something a cat would name a mountain. Mount Rerir. Yeah, I know. It's a bizarre name. Well, I mean, it's Tolkien. There are always bizarre names in here. And if I butcher pronunciation, I am sorry. I'm doing the best I can. So that's where the sons of Fëanor go. They sort of try to take themselves out of the equation as much as possible. Or Maedhros tries to take them out of the equation as much as possible to keep from lots of strife happening. So then we have Fingolfin and his son Fingon. They establish their realm in Hithlum, in this area here. And they set up a watchtower and a palace here, this area here. And this is their watchtower to keep an eye on Morgoth, of course, but also to like establish their own authority. And this place is called Silmarillion because it's a watchtower at the mouth of the main river here called Sirion. And so this is Silmarillion, or an artist representation of it. It's a watchtower, it's a palace, and you can sort of see like certain architectural similarities between this and stuff you may have seen in the movies, like Minas Tirith. I Stole the One Ring is saying it's okay. It's okay if you can't pronounce a name. Tolkien isn't here to tell you exactly how to pronounce the names. That's actually not entirely true, because in the Silmarillion, in the back of the book, there is actually a pronunciation guide. I've gone through it. It doesn't really cover everything, but it covers a good bit. So I'm doing my best based on this pronunciation guide here. So we have Fingon and Fingolfin ruling Hithlum from Silmarillion. That's where they set up. Now, Fingolfin has another son, Turgon. Now, Turgon's going to play a pretty big role in events to come. But for right now, he sort of expands a little bit beyond the realm of Hithlum and goes into this area here called Nevrast. And he establishes another kingdom there, or another palace there, called Vinyamar. And there's a cool picture of it here. That's Vinyamar. So it's a harbor city. It's on the shores. Who is next? Okay. I'm just sort of looking ahead to see where we go next. So, and that takes care of the sons of Fingolfin. Because there's only Fingolfin only has one other child, a daughter named Arethel, and her story we'll dive into next week. So that's Turgon for now. We're gonna revisit Turgon later on in this episode. So next. So next we have Suzanne has a tech question. Okay. What did I have to download to get this Ustream in the first place? I forgot. Trying to set this up on my new tablet. If you got a tablet, there should be just a Ustream app that you can use, and then you just need to pop in. You just need to go to the right channel. That should do it. So anyway, back to this. So next we've got the children of Finarfin. And so the one who we've talked about already, Angrod, who isn't the eldest son, but we're gonna talk to him. We're gonna talk about him first, since the sons of Finarfin are allowed into Doriath. They go more towards where Doriath is, and so Angrod and his brother Aegnor take up the rulership of this realm here called Dorthonion, which are basically highlands. Yeah, and this is Dorthonion. They don't really establish like a big fortress like Fingolfin did. But they keep a watch on the Highlands because this is an area that if Morgoth were to come out of Angband again, he'd probably go for this area here. But it's also a good, nice place to sort of hold him at bay if he tries to go after Doriath. And that is because of another area right down here at the south end of Dorthonion. These are some very sharp cliffs here. And this area is called Non-Dangortheb. And there are some mountains in there called Ered Gorgoroth, which you may remember from... No, that's Dorthonion. Wrong one. There we go. Here we are. And so Non-Dangortheb and Ered Gorgoroth, as you might remember, is where Ungoliant finally retreated to, and she set up her dark realm there with all of her dark spider children and all sorts of horrible creatures down in the ravines in this area. So it's a very brutal and harsh place. It's a very scary area, and it's scary even to Morgoth. And if Morgoth were to try to get to Doriath, he'd have to go through here. And not to mention, you then have to deal with the Girdle of Melian, which even Morgoth is probably the only person who could do some damage to that. So we have the Haunted Lands, Arid Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror, and so Angrod and his brother Egnor also keep watch on that area to make sure that the creatures in that area don't leave it. So that's that area. And who's next on the list? Sort of going down the list here. I believe next is the eldest son of Finarfin, Finrod. And he also will play a bigger role in the story later on. But for now, he establishes a watchtower here near the mouth of the river Sirion on an island called Tol Sirion. And this fortress probably has a name. It has a name that you'll probably recognize. Minas Tirith. But it is not that Minas Tirith. This is another Minas Tirith. And it's a watchtower and it's a fortress, but it's not the grand palace that we see in the Lord of the Rings. This is a completely different Minas Tirith, although the later Minas Tirith is built sort of in tribute to this. But it's also built in tribute to a couple other places. And also, it's a watchtower, and Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings is also essentially a watchtower. So the name makes sense. So this is Minas Tirith the First. And right now that's ruled by Finrod, although it won't be forever. He will actually establish something else later on, which we'll get to. So, next! And now we come to Thingol. So just so that everybody is aware where he's actually set up. I stole the One Ring saying, I bet that doesn't have a white tree either. It doesn't, no. Just so you know where Thingol is actually located, this is his kingdom here, Doriath. And under there is, in here, is his palace of Menegroth. And so he rules there with his wife Melian, who is actually a Maiar, so she's a very powerful spirit. And this is Menegroth, the Thousand Caves, and this is where Thingol rules. Aravandi is saying, I have a fake white tree of Gondor in my room. It lights up. That's freaking awesome, Aravandi. I'm just going to say that. Now they're talking a little bit about the white tree. What is everybody saying here? In my day, we didn't have a white tree and we liked it. And actually, the white tree of Gondor is a tribute to another tree, which is a tribute to another tree, which is a tribute to another tree. There's like lots of tree tributes in Tolkien. But that's a long, weird line, which we'll get into another time. So we have Thingol and Melian, who rule the Sindar Elves from Menegroth in the kingdom of Doriath. Got all that? Good. Let's move on. So next we have a guy who we haven't really talked about too much, Círdan, who is another elf who stayed behind and didn't travel to Valinor, and he is known as Círdan the Shipwright, because he stayed behind and learned all the tricks of seacraft from Osse, who is a Maiar who serves Ulmo, the Lord of the Seas. And his realm mostly is in this area here, with two major cities, Brithambar and Eglarest. And these are their havens. They're ship havens, much like the Grey Havens from the Lord of the Rings. Only these are full working cities as well. And so this is one of them. This is Eglarest, which is one of Caradonc's havens, and he has a long friendship with Thingol, and so that's going to play into events later when it comes to who Thingol's going to trust. And then finally, we have the Green Elves, which are they were elves who got diverted a long time ago, came over, and helped Thingol fight the orcs. And after that battle, a lot of them were destroyed. A lot of them were killed. So some of them joined Thingol and became part of the Sindar. The rest, the Green Elves, wanted to stay out of the fight, and they took up residence down in this area here called Osirian, the land of seven rivers. I know there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rivers in that area. There's more further down south. And so they tend to sort of stay out of the fight for the most part, but I thought I'd still just at least mention them because they are elves in Middle-earth. And this chapter, which is of Beleriand and its realms, Tolkien goes into a lot of detail about a lot of different areas, which is pretty much a show unto itself, and so I don't want to bog us down with all that information. So I'm just focusing on the stuff that is most likely going to be more relevant to the story we're telling here. But I would suggest, just to get like a larger sense of like detail and world building that Tolkien does, that it's a cool chapter, especially if you're interested in just seeing world building and seeing the attention to detail that Tolkien has in describing this land. It's pretty cool. So that's how everybody is dispersed over all this time, and this is very much a time of peace and a time of watchfulness. And Temple saying, just the stuff that's on the quiz, please. Yeah, luckily I'm not having a quiz on this because I've probably forgotten more about this than I should have already. So this is a peaceful time. It's a time of expansion. It's a time of establishment, and it's a time of fellowship, mostly. While everybody sort of bides their time waiting for the other shoe to drop with Morgoth. And so while this is happening, we have our two characters, Finrod and Turgon, who are good friends, and they decide at some point, you know what, we have spent so much time up here in the north keeping a watch on Angband, let's take a little trip. And so they decide to take a trip down south on the River Sirion down here, just to see the world and to get away from things for a while. And during that trip, they are visited in the night in a dream, both of them, by none other than Ulmo, the Lord of the Sea. And Ulmo says to them, or basically gives them both a vision of Middle-earth being overrun by orcs. And they both wake up having had this vision, but neither one of them actually talk to each other about it because they both believe that this was a private message from Ulmo just for them. So they never tell each other that they both basically had the same vision, and come back and decide on their own to establish hidden kingdoms, kind of like Doriath, for themselves and for their people. And so, come on, you could see what I had to deal with. So we're going to start with Finrod's story and what he does with this information. He goes to he and his sister Galadriel. They are summoned to a feast in Doriath by King Thingol. And it's there that Finrod, this is the first time he's seen Maedhros, and he's really taken with it. And so there's Melian as well. So Finrod tells Thingol what the vision that he's had. He tells him about his vision and how he wants to establish another secret kingdom like Maedhros. And Thingol, since they are somewhat related, says, okay, well, here is an area that I think would be good for that. And he takes him, or he shows him, he tells him about an area, if I can get to it, right around here, where there is caves underneath a river. The river is called Narog. And in these caves, he could set up his own kingdom. And that's exactly what Finrod does. And he establishes a new kingdom in the caves under there called Nargothrond, which looks kind of like this. And he brings a lot of his people with him to Nargothrond. Where is it? No, that's too far. Okay. So, Temple's saying the difference between Tolkien and Martin: if there's a feast in Tolkien, it's to discuss things. In Martin, someone or someones are gonna die. It's very true. And it also happens in Tolkien too, with the big feast of the return of Fëanor in Valinor, where Morgoth comes and kills the trees of Valinor and then kills Finwë. So that does happen in Tolkien, just not as predictably as it does in Martin. So Finrod establishes the kingdom of Nargothrond in these caves, and he also gets a new name, Felagund, which means hewer of caves, and he works with the dwarves to build this new kingdom, and they're happy for the work, and they're happy for and they love working with him, and so they make for him a very special necklace called the Nauglamir, which is going to play a role much later on in this story. And then this part of the story sort of ends with a bit of foreshadowing and a bit of a cliffhanger. The last sentence is, "But Finrod Felagund was not the first to dwell in the caves beside the river Narog." So there was something else down there. Someone else down there. But we don't find out who. Or he doesn't tell us who. At least not right now. Later on. It should also be noted that after this dinner in Maedhros, after Finrod leaves, Galadriel decides to stay. And the reason she decides to stay is because she meets a kinsman of Thingol named Celeborn, and they fall in love. And Galadriel then decides to stay behind, to stay with Celeborn, and what is this? Everybody's talking about the precautions you have to take when going to a feast in Martin's world. Yes. So Galadriel has met Celeborn here in Maedhros, and she decides to stay. And we'll get back to her later. Because she is going to play a part later on. So that's Finrod, and Eravandi, Galadriel, and Celeborn sitting in a tree. Technically, they're sitting in a cave, but I get what you mean. So that's the story of Finrod and the creation of the second kingdom of Nargothrond, or the second hidden kingdom of Nargothrond. And so then this raises a question that must be answered. What the heck has Morgoth been up to this whole time? So everybody is being silly about Galadriel and Celeborn. Cute. So what has Morgoth been up to this entire time? Well, it's suggested a couple chapters later that during most of this, Morgoth wasn't even in Angband. He was off. He had snuck out very stealthily to take care of something else, something that will play a part later on. And he left command of Angband and the wars to Sauron, because of course he would. But at this point, Morgoth is definitely back from wherever he was, if he even left in the first place. Like I said, it's only suggested in later chapters that he left. It could have been the other way around. It could have been that Morgoth stayed in Angband and Sauron was the one who left to take care of whatever they were taking care of. But there was definitely dark powers meddling somewhere else in the world. And like we've talked about before, this is written as an elvish history. So the insight into Morgoth's mind is never really covered in this. There's always just speculation and suggestion. But at this point, Morgoth has decided the elves have gotten lazy. They've spread out. It's time to send out the orcs again. And so that's exactly what they do. He sends out a huge force of orcs. Back to the map. Down into Dorthonion. He sends a whole bunch of orcs down here. Let's see how that shows up. Yeah, so the orcs are up here, and they're heading down into Dorthonion. But Morgoth has underestimated the elves because both Fingolfin and Maedhros are totally ready for him. And so they send their forces into Dorthonion from both sides and wipe out the orcs utterly. It's another just completely one-sided battle. The elves hand the orcs their butts in a huge and horrible way. Very few orcs are left alive. And this is one of the great battles of the Wars of Beleriand, and it's called the Dagor Aglareb, the Glorious Battle. And but it's at this point Fingolfin also realizes that, you know what, we have spread ourselves a little thin. Let's start bringing everybody back, and really starting to set up a very strong front against Morgoth, because now Morgoth is coming back, and he's probably going to keep coming back. And so he establishes what is essentially called the Siege of Angband. But it's not really a siege in the way that you're thinking. Basically, it's more of a standoff. The elves, who are located here in the southern areas, are very strong, and they're keeping all the orcs up here at bay so nobody can spread out. But at the same time, the walls of Angband are so impenetrable that they just can't get through. The Noldor Elves, they can't get through this at all. And so it's very much a standoff between the orcs and the elves, with neither gaining much ground. And this lasts... Okay, get ready for this. This standoff lasts for 400 years. This is a 400-year siege on Angband, led by Fingolfin. And a lot of stuff happens in that time. So there's Angband. So we have the orcs here, who are basically kind of trapped in Angband. But one thing you have to remember is that Angband is impenetrable, and there is a huge mountain range behind it, the Iron Mountains. I stole the One Ring saying, so they just stood there for 400 years? Sorta. About to get into that. Temple saying, so many phone calls because it's my birthday. I just want to focus on the book club now, darn it. Well, happy birthday, Temple. Yay. Happy birthday, Temple. I'm glad that you're here for the book club on your birthday, and hopefully once the show's done you can get out and enjoy your day. But happy birthday, Temple. Yay. Anyway, back to the story. So we have the Iron Mountains that are behind the gates of Angband, like this area up here, which are completely impassable to elves, not to orcs. So Morgoth begins sending orcs out through the Iron Mountains up here, and they come down around here, more of a stealth attack through here to get into Hithlum. And so they're not sending out huge armies. They're sending out smaller raiding parties, and what they're doing is they're kidnapping elves in Hithlum and taking them back to Angband and torturing them and interrogating them to find out everything they can about what the elves are doing. And not only does Morgoth learn about how the elves have spread, he's also able to turn some of these elves to his side. He's able to corrupt them, and they can become agents for Morgoth, which will play a role later on. I keep saying this will play a role later on. I'm always there's always stuff that happens early on that I feel needs to be talked about in order for you to appreciate what it'll do later on in the story. So now we have orcs that have kidnapped elves and returned them as sinister agents. And then Fingolfin also finds out that they've been sneaking in and has a bit of a skirmish with them, and Tolkien says it's not counted among the great battles of the Wars of Beleriand, but it was still a pretty intense victory. But at the same time, Morgoth is realizing that there's really not much that he can do with orcs. Orcs are just not cutting it as far as taking out the elves are concerned. And so we enter in a new creation, something brand new that the elves have never seen, that is going to hopefully hurt them and hopefully actually create a break in this siege, and that is Glaurung, the first dragon, which is pretty cool. And Glaurung comes out and he terrorizes the elves, and they're completely like gobsmacked by this. They don't know what to make of this dragon, and so all they can do is fight it. And enter again Fingon, who leads a group of archers to go after Glaurung, and they pepper him with arrows, and basically to the point where Glaurung finally has to retreat. And this is because he's still young and he still hasn't developed his full armor. And so Morgoth is a little upset by this because he feels that Glaurung was revealed too early, and now the elves can prepare for another attack by a dragon because now they know about dragons. But that's our first appearance of a dragon in Middle Earth. And as always, like, because the Noldor Elves are basically superheroes, they're able to take him out and send him back to Angband. So that's what's going on with the Siege of Angband, and that's going on for 400 years. So let's go to another part of the story. Let's go back to Doriath, back to Maedhros. And in here, as we talked about before, Galadriel is there. Erevandi's saying bad planning on Morgoth's part. It wasn't entirely Morgoth's fault. The way Tolkien describes it, Glaurung was overeager and sort of left on his own. And so Morgoth wasn't too happy about that because he left too early. You know, like kind of like Darth Vader and Admiral Ozzel from Empire Strikes Back, when Admiral Ozzel comes out of Lightspeed too close to the Hoth system, and the rebels are able to put up their shield. But Morgoth doesn't do the same thing Vader does. He doesn't kill Glaurung. He just scolds him pretty much, because Glaurung will come back. He'll be back much later. And so here in Maedhros we have Galadriel. She's spending time with Celeborn, but she's also spending a lot of time with Melian. And it's at this point that Melian starts to very politely interrogate Galadriel, because she knows that there is more to the story of why the elves came over from Valinor than they've been told. And so Galadriel, I don't want to say interrogated. She's just asked over and over again. She's asked very firmly, and since Melian has some insight into all of this, or she knows that there is more going on than they've been told, and Galadriel realizes that she really can't hide this from her, so she does tell her some of what happened. She tells her about the Silmarils and the destruction of the trees and the slaying of King Finwë, who was a very good friend of King Thingol's. And yeah, so many pages to get through here. And so so there's a whole conversation between them, but Melian still knows that there's more. And so she says, "Now much you tell me, and yet more I perceive. A darkness you would cast over the long road from Tirion. But I see evil there which Thingol should learn for his guidance." And Galadriel just responds with, "Maybe, but not from me." So Galadriel has told her as much as she is willing to tell. And Melian takes this information to Thingol, most because, of course, he should know that his friend has died, and of course that saddens him a lot. But she also warns him that the fate of the world is bound up in these Silmarils, and that this is not just a petty squabble between Fëanor and his people and Morgoth. This is since the Silmarils have the light of Aman in them, and actually the only remaining light, their fate is now bound to the fate of the earth. And so she basically is saying, like, we need to pay attention to this because not even the Noldor realize the scope of what they're doing. And she also warns him that the Noldor, or primarily the sons of Fëanor, are not all they seem to be, and that she foresees that they will betray him or turn on him at some point. And she says, this is their conversation. Melian says, "Truly for these causes they came, but for others also. Beware of the sons of Fëanor. The shadow of the wrath of the Valar lies upon them, and they have done evil, I perceive, both in Aman and to their own kin. A grief but lulled to sleep lies between the princes of the Noldor." And Thingol answered, "What is that to me? Of Fëanor I have heard but report, which makes him great indeed. Of his sons I hear little to my pleasure. Yet they are likely to prove the deadliest foes of our foe." And then Melian retorts with, "Their swords and their counsels shall have two edges." So she's warning him there's more to this than we've heard so far. Even though we've learned new information, there is more information that we still haven't learned. And Thingol kind of shrugs it off because he's like, he doesn't really care for the sons of Fëanor, but he also knows that they are a formidable force, and so he's sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend with them. And they leave it at that until... Remember how I told you Morgoth had created some dark agents among the elves? Well, now is their time to shine. They begin spreading stories because Morgoth has learned through them that Thingol doesn't really know everything about what went on with Fëanor. And so he begins having his agents tell stories, and these eventually reach the ears of Círdan. Stories about the kinslaying at Alqualunde, and how the blood of their kin are on the hands of Fëanor and his family. And also not just Fëanor, but Fingolfin and Finarfin and everybody. This is where Morgoth twists the truth, and he blames everybody who came over as culprits in this. And Círdan, hearing these stories, I believe Tolkien says, certain it is whence they came, and the evil truth was enhanced and poisoned by lies. But the Sindar were yet unwary and trustful of words, and, as may well be thought, Morgoth chose them for this first assault of his malice, for they knew him not. So, basically, the Sindar, they've never really dealt with deception before, not like this. So the fact that these words are coming from other elves means they feel they can trust them. Not only are they coming from other elves, they're coming from Sindar elves. Like, this is coming from Círdan, who has heard it from dark agents from Morgoth. So to Thingol, this is truth. That everybody who came over from the west is guilty of kinslaying. And so enter Finrod again, and all the children of Fëanor. They come together again for a feast for a meeting in Maedhros, and it's here that Thingol finally just lets it rip and tells Finrod and everybody, "I know what you did. I've heard all the stories about the kinslaying, and how dare you come to me and not ask for forgiveness, and how dare you keep this from me?" To which Finrod is totally like taken aback by this. Like, he knows that Thingol hasn't been told about the kinslaying, but now he's heard about it, but he's heard about it wrong. And so Finrod says, you have to trust me. The sons of Fëanor didn't play a part in this kinslaying. We arrived late. It was already done by the time we came. But Thingol isn't willing to listen, because he still knows that there is more to this, and he doesn't trust him anymore. And it's finally here that Angrod chimes in, because he always felt slighted by the sons of Fëanor because of the way Caranthir treated him when he first brought Thingol's counsel to them. So Angrod comes out and tells him the truth, that the sons of Fëanor are guiltless in this, but they are still bound up with the Oath of Fëanor. Fingolfin and his sons have atoned for this because of their icy march, and all the woes that they encountered through that. And so it's really just the sons of Fëanor who are red-handed in this, and he's very angry about it. And where? But Thingol finally just says, "I can't take this. You need to leave." And he said, "Right now, my heart is too hot," or something like that. Where is it? Yeah. "Go now, for my heart is hot within me. Later you may return if you will, for I will not shut my doors forever against you, my kindred, that are ensnared in an evil that you did not aid. With Fingolfin and his people also I will keep friendship, for they have bitterly atoned for such ill as they did. And in our hatred of the power that wrought all this woe, our grief shall be lost. But hear my words. Never again in my ears shall be heard the tongue of those who slew my kin in Alqualande, nor in all my realm shall it be openly spoken while my power endures. All the Sindar shall hear my command, that they shall neither speak with the tongue of the Noldor, nor answer to it. And all such as use it shall be held slayers of kin and betrayers of kin unrepentant." So he's laying down the law here, because they've had an intermingling of languages, the Sindar and the Noldor, and Thingol puts his foot down and says, "We are not speaking the Noldor tongue in Middle-earth anymore, and anybody who does will be considered a betrayer of me and will be shunned." And that's where Thingol leaves it. So it's a pretty harsh thing, but now the truth has finally come out, and now Thingol knows exactly what's happening and can better prepare himself for what's going to happen later on. So now we go to another dinner, or another festival, another feast, this time in Nargothrond. And I'm only bringing this one up because it does... It's his hand saying, "And you will sit in timeout and you will cry." Yes. It doesn't sound like the harshest of punishments, but it actually kind of is. Because he's basically forcing the Noldor to acquiesce to him or be called traitors. So anyway, here we have another feast in Nargothrond, and I'm bringing this up because it's portentous to events that'll happen later on. And Finrod plays host to his brothers and his sister, and Galadriel, who was very happy with Celeborn, and she's just full of love, and she finally turns to Finrod, and asks him the question that any happily married sibling will ask their single sibling, which is, when are you going to find someone and settle down? I mean, she says it much more eloquently, but that's the gist of what she says. And it's at this point, this sort of triggers a vision in Finrod's head. And gives him a prophecy, and he says, I can't take a wife, I can't settle down, because I'm going to make an oath at some point in my future, and I need to be free to do so. That's going to play a part later on, the oath that he takes. Much later on, actually, quite a few chapters ahead of us. But this is very portentous, and also kind of like weirdly coincidental that Finrod finally gets this vision only when a very specific question about it is asked of him. But that's how they roll in Middle-earth. Finrod is going to stay single in order to stay free, in order to take and keep an oath later in his life. And so now we come to the last part about our good buddy Turgon, who we sort of left by the wayside. And I did that deliberately because I felt it was best to end with this story about Turgon, because he also had a vision from Ulmo, and he also wants to establish a secret kingdom. But because he is a son of Fingolfin and not Finarfin, he can't get that inside information from Thingol that Finrod could. So he gets inside information from somebody else, none other than Ulmo. Ulmo tells him, "You can find a good secret place if you follow this river into these mountains." And it's this river and these mountains right around here. Now, I'm telling this a little out of sequence from how it happens in the book. This actually happens in the text earlier on, but I wanted to end with this story because I think it's a good way to end it. So Ulmo directs Turgon to this area here, and he goes through a secret cave inside the mountains here and comes across a completely hidden and surrounded vale called Tumladen. It's surrounded on all sides by mountains, and it's a beautiful vale, and it has a little hill in the middle of it. And he realizes that this is the perfect place to set up a hidden kingdom that he can model after the elven city of Tirion back in Valinor. And so he very quietly and surreptitiously begins getting elf workers to come into this area and start to build a city. And that city you probably have heard of. It's called Gondolin. And little by little, he starts to establish this city, bringing all of his people in with him, until finally he empties out the previous kingdom that he was in, Vinyamar. He empties it out entirely, and everybody has moved into Gondolin, and then he seals the mountain, basically cutting Gondolin off from the rest of the world, so that they can build up their own armory, their own lifestyle, and they can be fully protected from Morgoth. So Gondolin is very much a secret and hidden kingdom, and is completely cut off. But more is going to happen in Gondolin, and it's not going to stay a secret forever. But that's for next week. So that's going to be it for this portion of the Silmarillion. I'm so glad I was able to get through this without the software crashing. So, get rid of that. No, come on, get rid of that thing. There we go. So, like I said, that was a lot to get through. That's about 3 big chapters worth of stuff in this book, and we've covered a lot of stuff. There's been a lot of battles. There's been a lot of establishment of kingdoms. There's been deception. There's been a lot of deception. There's been a lot of strife. There's been some great stories here, and one of the things I always like to do is try to figure out, like, if this were to be adapted into like a Game of Thrones type of TV series, I would say in these 3 chapters we've probably gone through a good 2 seasons worth of material, maybe more. So this is going to take us to the end of this portion here, and it's good that we did these 3 chapters because they all sort of do go together. The next chapter is kind of a standalone story, and the chapter after that takes us into a new era with new friends and new foes. I stole the One Ring saying a lot of fire. Yes, there was a lot of fire in this. That's what happens when you fight Morgoth. You get fire. So for next week, where are we at? We're at about an hour and 45 here. That's not so bad. I want to thank everybody for sticking with me through this, and I want to thank you also for your patience as I figured out all of the crazy software issues that I had to deal with on this. But now we got it going. We can start pushing forward with this again and keep this on track, because I still want to end the Silmarillion discussion at the end of August. So I want to get us through all of that. So there were a couple chapters later on that I was kind of hoping to split into 2 episodes, primarily the chapter of Beren and Luthien and the chapter of Turumbar, just because both of those chapters are huge and so much happens in them. But instead we're gonna do it in one episode each, not one episode for both. That's ridiculous. But those are going to be happening later. Next week, we're going to be doing 2 chapters, 2 much shorter chapters, of Maeglin and of the coming of men into the West. So finally, men are going to start playing a part in this. And also the story of Maeglin is it's a very it's a very dark story, and it's a very tragic story. So I'm looking forward to talking about that one, because it's not a huge story like Turin Turambar or Baron and Luthien, but it is an intense one. And then the Coming of Men, I'm going to warn you, there is a point in this where Tolkien outlines a group of descendants for several generations. I am not going to go through that whole genealogy. I'm going to focus on the characters who are going to play a key role in the story. I want to keep us focused because, like, towards the end of the Coming of Men chapter, he throws a lot of names at you all at once. So I'm just going to focus on the ones that we need to know about. So yeah, next week is of Maeglin and of the Coming of Men into the West. And then I like how everybody's getting excited about Baron and Luthien. Baron and Luthien is coming up, but not for a couple more weeks. And I am very much looking forward to that one. That's one of my favorite stories from the whole thing. So we'll leave it at that for this week. A reminder that our book of the month is The Neverending Story. So grab it if you can find it. Barring that, if you have an Audible account, there is a very nice audiobook version available there. So I will see you all next week. Thank you, everybody. Happy birthday, Temple. I hope you have a wonderful day. I think you said you're going to see Avengers today. I hope you enjoy it. And I will see you all next week for more Silmarillion, and never stop reading.